Hi,
How are you?
great. How are you?
I'm good.
So, hi Dylan, thanks for joining us today. I'm so happy to have you as my guest.
Happy to be here.
And my subscribers already sent me a lot of questions. How about we start from you introduce yourself and your research field?
Sure. So my name's Dylan Gowans, and I specialize in macroeconomics. In particular, right now, my main research has been about pricing by firms. And so, actually, if you look at markups, so the amount that firms charge over costs, since about 1980, it's increased substantially in the United States. And so, there's quite a bit of debate about why this is. And so, that's what I've been working on right now.
Interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And why did you choose to study economics in college? Was there any interesting story happen?
So actually, I started in my first year in sociology, interested in all kinds of social issues, and I thought sociology would be the way to study those. But I did a minor in economics. But kind of as I took courses in economics, it occurred to me that it was a field with a lot of unanswered questions.
Right.
I mean, it's still a very young discipline. And
Yeah.
so, as a result, I realized there was a lot more I could do in economics, maybe, than I could in sociology. And so,
Right.
in my second or third year, I think I switched. I mean, there's so many interesting questions to answer. So,
Yeah. That's very interesting because I'm actually a commerce student, but I also found economics really interesting.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's really something that a lot of the time, I think it depends how it's taught. But I mean, if it's taught to students in a way where it reveals that there are lots of debates and things that aren't clear still, then I think it's great. But a lot of the times, I think it's taught in a way where these are the answers to the questions. We've already solved everything in
Right.
economics, But yeah.
Yeah. And the next question may be more general. In your understanding, what means to think like an economist? And what is economics' contribution to the society?
Right. So in the first one, actually, I have a different view on this, I think, than a lot of economists do. Um, I think economists, it's a weird field because it's one of the few fields that defines itself in terms of uh, the methods it uses rather than what it studies. So if you ask a historian what they do, they study history. Or you ask a psychologist what they do, they study human behavior. But if you
Right.
ask an economist what they do, they say, I use assumptions about maximizing behavior of individuals to study whatever I want. And 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 that's usually what's meant by think like an economist is it means assume that people behave rationally and
Mhm.
they are always trying to optimize their behavior by using this kind of calculus based method of
Right.
optimization. And I guess I'd push back on that and say that economists should employ many different ways of studying problems, not just that one. And really, I think to think like an economist should just mean to think about economic problems. So things about production and distribution in a society. But I know it's kind of a contentious view, so I'll be
So,
clear about that.
so do you mean that economics is using different method to study about our society? Like,
Yeah, well, I think that I think that economics should define itself in terms of what it studies, which is the economy. So that's,
right.
questions like why are prices what they are, why are incomes what they are, why are certain things produced. But I think that kind of maybe for the last, I don't know, 75 years, economists have been talking a lot about we study whatever we want. What links everything we study together is the way we do it, which is assuming rational maximizing agents and using kind of these mathematical methods where we model everything as an optimization problem. And so
Right.
that's even why, like a book like Freakonomics, which is very popular.
Right. I read that.
Yeah. So the topics in that book are incredibly diverse. I mean, it
Hmm.
mostly has nothing to do with the economy per se, but it was
Right.
written by some economists employing these so-called economic methods. And
Hmm.
that's great. That's very interesting. I mean, it's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I think that
Right.
economists maybe should be more broad in the methods they use, maybe.
Yeah. And there are many books like, for example, like the economics of like marriage or the economics of planting trees. And these kind of books, do you consider them as economics also?
Personally, no, I don't. I think that this is the other danger for economists too, is that they have this tendency to talk about, oh, well, other fields might study these things, like human
Mhm.
behavior, for example.
Right.
This is the domain of psychology, but economists think, oh, well, we can do that better. We can do that better, and we're not even going to listen to what those psychologists say for the most part because, we know how to do it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that, I mean, it's good. I'm not saying economists shouldn't think about these things, but I think they should be more humble, maybe,
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
you know,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Very true. And so the behavioral economics is kind of a new research field in recent years. And could you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, of course. So it's yeah, it's trying to kind of get away from this view that everyone's rational. And so there's been a lot of interesting research. I admit I'm not an expert on it. Um, just looking at kind of either bounded rationality. So it's not that people aren't rational, it's just
Right.
that, you know, there's so much information out there, it's impossible to. So, for example, you go to the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
Economics would say, I pick the goods, I pick like the groceries I need that will maximize my well-being.
Right.
And behavioral economists would say, well, no, that's almost impossible. To know
Hmm.
which goods maximize your well-being, you'd have to try all of them, for example. And so you're bounded rational. You don't have all the information. And so as a result, I go to the grocery store and I rely on, for example, rules of thumb. I say, well, I usually buy this peanut butter, so I'll get this peanut butter.
Hmm.
Or I grew up eating this bread, so I'll just get this bread. I know it's good, so I'm not going to go and try every kind of bread to see which one's the best. And so, looking at things like that, I guess trying to approximate how people actually behave and get away from this kind of fiction that everyone's always optimizing and knows everything and, can make perfect decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And the next question is about macroeconomics or economy as a whole. This year's pandemic has huge impact on the world economy. And what is the bad thing economists can do to deal with this kind of black swan events? And how effective the economic models can be, and what are some limitations to the models?
Right. So I guess, of course, by definition, if it's an incredibly rare black swan event, then
Hmm.
obviously our models, are only as good, I guess, as the data we have. And if we don't have data on an event like this, then, I mean, it's never going to be perfect. But of course, I mean, that doesn't mean that we're completely useless because there's still going to be some regularities about this event that are similar to past events, right? And so I
Right.
guess it's really about kind of looking at the ways in which this is similar to past events,
Mhm.
but also being humble, realizing that it's never going to be
Yeah.
exactly the same. Including, so for example, this is a good example of how someone didn't do a good job of being humble about how this is different. Is there's a piece of research that came out, which is a very interesting paper, um, where these economists claim that they say something like 40% of the jobs lost during this crisis won't come back, which is a
Hmm.
huge amount, right?
Yeah.
And so, and this has been picked up by newspapers. You'll see it in newspaper articles. They say, oh, well, research has found that 40% of jobs aren't coming back. So then if you look at the paper, the way they do it is they say, well, about 70% of people who are currently laid off in the United States say that it's a temporary layoff. And traditionally, I can't remember, about 70% of people who say that they are temporarily laid off are actually temporarily laid off. So therefore, 70% of 70%
Hmm.
is, about 49% of people are actually temporarily laid off. But of course, I mean, this is a dangerous thing to, conclusion to jump to, right? Because if in the past 70% of people who said they're temporarily laid off were actually temporarily laid off. Those were very different situations to today, in which there's
Right.
a huge increase in temporary layoffs. And it's an incredibly different recession than, say, 2008. And
Hmm.
so, you know, as you kind of mentioned or pointed out, I mean, it's dangerous to make these conclusions based on past events when this is a very different one.
And what is the best way for students to study about economics? Like, because commonly just lectures and probably some practice questions. And how can like students better understand those concepts and the questions?
Yeah, I would say read the newspaper and especially economic news. So, for example, I recently took out a subscription to the Financial Times. I had one years
Oh,
ago and I stopped reading it and then I came back to it now. But it's great because it presents these ideas in very easy to understand writing. And
yeah.
again, it shows you kind of the problems that exist today, especially
Hmm.
right now in
Right.
this pandemic. And so I'd say that's a great way. Because I think for students too, what's most important is that you find a way to be interested in the subject.
Yeah.
And if you can be motivated and interested, then I think that's what's important. And so, yeah, I'd say read the newspaper and see kind of, there are all kinds of, I would say actually also follow economists on Twitter because they post all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that because I am a finance and economics student. And I think reading those financial and economic news actually is really helpful for us to understand those concepts mentioned in classes.
I
Yeah,
agree. And it makes them, you know,
interesting, more interesting.
interesting and concrete because a lot of the times you learn about them in class and they're very abstract and
Right,
it's
right.
nice to kind of put them in the real world. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Real world. So here is the last question. What advice would you give to students considering study economics?
I would say try to broaden your reading when you study. So I'd say do study, but try to read a lot of different things because
Right.
often the undergraduate courses won't introduce you to a lot of different ideas. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
nice to kind of read broadly, even just looking on the internet. So, for example, right now there's a big debate about there's a school of thought called modern monetary theory, and it's very contentious. But it's a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting debate, and you won't learn about it in
Mm-hmm.
class.
Yeah, yeah,
You're in textbooks. But it's, economists, big names are having debates about it. And so
yeah.
I think these are the kinds of things to read about.
Okay, great. I think that's pretty much all for today. And really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you so much for joining us. Hope you are staying safe and healthy.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
If you want to further improve your English or learn more about the world, scan the code to join us on 知识星球. We have weekly courses and Q&A sessions. Thanks for watching. See you next time.